All right, so one of the first things that people say when they hear about this, as they hear 64,000 or 128,000 square textures, they say, how could you possibly, they imagine bringing that up in Photoshop and painting all of that, and you're like, how could you possibly even make any use of that? But it turns out it's really not like that, where you could use this technology and never even think about a big texture, because it could just make all of your texture budgeting decisions go away. You could just use it like any other game engine and not worry about texture size. You could make everything 2K or 4K textures on here. But for the outside landscape, we went through a few different cycles on figuring out how we want to build these worlds. And enemy territory was sort of the alpha test of this technical direction on here, where the idea for enemy territory was that we had a procedural synthetic way to create a base layer, and then you could go in and add some stamps on top of it. And we think enemy territory is best of breed at the moment. We think it kind of defines the high water mark right there, but we believe that we could go a whole lot further with what we're doing here. So we wound up, after evolving this over a few different levels, with 3 levels of interaction that you've got here. So to build one of these worlds, the artists first start off with whatever program they want, whether it's Modo or Max or Lightwave, and they build the world using as much textures as they want. They can use 20 gigs of textures. It just doesn't matter. They can choke whatever art program they want to with that to build this base layer. And you look at that and you can say, oh, that looks pretty good, but it doesn't have all the fine detail. It's got seams between textures where they meet up and all of these things. So we then have an intermediate layer where the dimmed areas here are the base layer that they built in the modeling program. The highlighted areas are tile maps. So some game outdoor engines use explicitly tile maps, and in fact, I originally tried to do this where, assuming we just had tiles with stamps on top of it, but that didn't give us the high-level detail, the great big rocks that we wanted. But what this does allow you to do is go ahead and scrub in like grass on here. You've got a path here, and you say you want to turn it into a grassy path rather than a sandy path, and you can rough in these things in this mode, and then it goes ahead and calculates it, does really nice blending along all of the edges, and puts all of that underneath the stamps. So if you decide that I want a path going up this mountain here, it's really easy to just grab this and scrub a path up there and regen, and it's got pretty nice edges. But then you can go into the real detail level with the stamping, where all these things that were on top of that grassy area that the artists had done were things that they had pulled from a palette, stretched, rotated, and dropped down here. And this is where you really get the level of detailing that you want, where you can go in and act like an artist would, where an artist doesn't, usually throw some huge glob up there. They take a more detailed tool and they drop it down in tens, hundreds, or thousands of different places. And it totally doesn't matter to us whether they drop down one giant rock piece or if they take one rock piece and stamp it down 1,000 times in different places. So we have this ability. You can take anything that you want. It's easy for them to create palettes of things like this, and they can drop it down. There's a lot of tools options that we have to mess with this. They can undo, redo, go through all of this. So it's obviously really easy to do. You can sit down and anybody can grab some things and say, I want to put some graffiti over here, or I think that this should go over here. But when you put it in the hands of a real artist, some of these results are just fabulous. And it's been very effective in terms of time to do this, where the total time to build this level is only about 2 man-months, and that's with us figuring out how the heck we're going to do this. But I think that and one of the things is, as we've spent more time on here, our standards are going up and up. I mean, the first things when we just saw a little hillside with them doing some things, I'm like, wow, that's really neat. But now, any area that an artist turns their attention to just winds up looking fabulous. Like this area here, this used to just be that same sandy rock that was everywhere, but we decided we wanted to make this a parking lot for the vendor's shop in there. So they didn't touch anything on the geometry. Again, no impact on any of the other game stuff. They just went in with the tiling, set up a lot of different asphalt things that get blended together, and then going over to the stamping on there to add the extra detail on top of that. And they just transformed that. And that took, it was like 15, 20 minutes. He's just going down there, and any area that they choose to look at can be made to look awesome. Now, of course, the corollary to this, though, is that we're making these immense worlds, so there's still some amount of balancing where they have to choose, okay, we have all of this area. Obviously, we don't want to spend too much time. Like if you zoom way out, the tops of the mountains and stuff aren't terribly detailed because the player's never supposed to get up there. And we have the ability to work at like different resolutions in there. Lots of different tools that we get for for being able to effectively work where the tiny little detail areas like we were doing there, they work pretty interactively and fast. But if you wind up trying to slap something across an entire mountainside, it might take 5 minutes to go ahead and update. And if you're doing something at a high level, you may choose to work at a lower resolution so that you can update that a little bit quicker. But then like here in this townscape, this was a little piece I had this cut out on the floor when I was testing something there. And it started off all this just plain simple sand on there. But then the artists go in, they start working at it, and all of this stuff starts popping up. And you can see they just laid down pages of newspaper and things on top of it. There's footprints and tire track marks and all of this stuff that's going over there. And it's this deep, deep layered approach where, in theory, you could do this with, with a standard Doom 3 type technology, but it would go horribly, heinously slow if you stacked up 10 levels of transparent detail like that. But in this case, since it all winds up being just kind of combined together into this, there's, again, no impact, and it allows the artist to just sit there and do this great, great work. It's always kind of the most exciting part for me as an engine core technology programmer, where we reach this point where the artists are finally able to really start using this stuff, and it always goes way beyond. I'm not an artist. I have a limited, I guess, visual creative ability on here, where I figure, okay, I know what people are going to want to do, and I'm thinking you'll put a stamp under every tree so that it doesn't look like it just juts out of the ground, and that type of thing that was obvious to me that you want to do. But a lot of this level of detail that goes on in here, that's from the vision of an artist, somebody that really does see this. One of my thoughts is the difference between artists and most people is the fidelity of their imagination. You can say grimy town with all of this stuff in here, and I've got some vague image in my mind, but a real artist sees something like this, and then they're able to go in and get it down onto the monitor screen. So it's pretty exciting about the possibilities and things that we've got going here. And we've been showing this to a number of other people in that we're pushing back a little bit more into technology licensing now, where we had huge success through the whole Quake through Quake 3 side of things, but the Doom generation of technology, we only wound up having a few other projects, id projects and Prey, largely because there's a few things that we missed on that. A lot of people were interested in vehicles and outdoor areas, which we just didn't have in Doom, and we wound up eventually developing all that for enemy territory, but it wasn't sort of in the core technology there. And also it has had a deserved reputation for producing great technology with not so great tools around it, because we've never had a huge staff. It's always been a small number of people that are doing good work, but not necessarily adding a lot of user-friendly polish, because it was always a matter of, if I do something neat, then I just have to explain to 5 artists how to do it. It's not like we're broadcasting to a really huge audience there. But now, as we've grown in headcount and the number of people that we have to even teach internally, we've hired full-time dedicated tools programmers and support programmers now, because we need it for ourselves internally just to satisfy everyone's requests. But it also means that we're at a point now where all of the stuff that used to be driven just by text files to run things, we have nice interactive editors for this entire studio environment that we've got for all of our tools interfacing in, which, as a matter of fact, this actually ships with the game. Anybody that brings down the PC version of the console types id Studio, and all of this dev environment pops up on it. So we've had really good response from the dozen or so people that we've wound up showing this to at E3 and here at QuakeCon, because it's always fun to talk about the graphics, the image, what you get for your screenshot on here, but a lot of these things really are process level important. What matters for your company strategically about how you're going to develop across the different platforms, how you're going to allocate your resources, how you're going to be able to transfer them from project to project. And these are things that they may not necessarily be the most sexy topics to talk about for technology on there, but they are really important. I mean, this is big business here when you're talking tens of millions of dollars for game development budgets, teams of dozens or hundreds of people in some cases. And a lot of these issues about how you can apply more people to a problem are really significant. It's like the parallelization problem that we deal with in multi-core CPUs. It's how to figure out how to divide up the tasks so that they don't interfere with each other. And I have I have this vision plan for IdTech 6. Hopefully we get to virtualize geometry in the same sense so you can sculpt the same way you can paint in this. But restricted to this one area of working at surfaces, this does some really magnificent things. And I hope that in the future, as we're looking at PS4s and 720s and 16-core CPUs, that we'll be able to do a level of technology that lets us apply this really to the rest of the equation. But I do think this is still a significant step forward.